In the Brethren's view of the universe, God sits at the top of the pyramid, followed so closely by the man of God, Bruce D. Hales, that to make any distinction between the two is regarded as an act of treason. Then come the royal family, Bruce's 4 sons, Gareth, Dean, Greg, and Charles. Below them come the so-called Levites, arrogant and ruthless businessmen such as Rod Diplock and Mick Strange, whom Bruce makes wealthy and who in return loyally defend his interests. Below them come the males of the common herd of the Brethren, and below them the females. All those work hard to enrich the man of God and the royal family. The males get paid for their work, married females volunteer. These 5 upper layers of the hierarchy of the universe are all that are to be saved. Everything outside of this tiny elite, who call themselves the saints, constitutes the world, a system controlled by Satan, but which is put there for the brethren to plunder and exploit. The inhabitants of the world, called worldlies behind their backs, and non-community members to their faces, are likewise there to be exploited and discarded once their usefulness ends. These persons are neither loved or hated. They are mere servants, beneath the dignity of the saints to discuss or consider. There are, however, 2 classes of humanity below these, and in these the brethren take a great interest. The opposers are regarded with fear and hatred. Prayers are publicly made in the Brethren's gospel halls for their death and removal. Any saint caught in the act of communicating with an opposer is immediately excommunicated. Opposers are blamed and made scapegoats for every misfortune that besets the church. Opposers are kept under constant surveillance by private investigators, and any opportunity to intimidate or litigate them into silence is seized upon and pursued to the bitter end, with no regard to either expense or morality. The Brethren have so much to hide that opposers who are willing to spill the beans publicly on their crimes are an existential threat. Those mutual beneficial links with corrupt cabinet ministers, the wholesale money laundering and tax evasion, the rampant sexual abuse, all these pleasures and privileges of the Brethren elite are threatened by the persistent little voices that from time to time catch the attention of both journalists and departments of government to the detriment of the cult. Richard Marsh has been one of those little voices for many years. His persistence has cost the Brethren both large amounts of revenue and the respect of many influential persons. From 2015, when Richard first started publishing, to this day, the Brethren have pursued him with an endless stream of harassment. This episode exposes in detail just 2 or 3 months of Richard's experiences at the hands of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. The 4 quotes below from the published ministry of man of God Bruce D. Hales are examples of the virulent hate speech against opposers that comes constantly from the very top of the exclusive Brethren Church.
The media is a forum to attack persons, attack groups, attack individuals. The devil's got hold of it. Not so easy to grapple with it, is it? The media is a masterstroke of the enemy to corrupt man's minds. You see, the current attack really involves persons in high places being poisoned against the saints by opposers. Persons that have become apostate, opposing the Brethren. It's a very serious matter. Of course, be rare that persons will go out from amongst us get into that position, but there are others who will attack the position, fooled really by Satan against what's true. Some lose their way, that's one matter. Others that come back as opposers against the position, that's a very serious matter. God will deal with these persons in due time. Persons that attack the truth in a very bold way, they don't get recovered. Recovery is not open to them. God is finished with them. There's no common ground with persons that don't believe in God. Get the best legal guns high you can get, and just keep shooting until there's not one of them remaining.
Brethren's surveillance and harassment of leavers, and especially opposers, commenced in the 1960s, but has become greatly intensified under the paranoid hand of Bruce D. Hales. This bitter campaign continues to this day against hundreds of former members of the cult all around the globe. We could mention Laurie Moffat, Peter Harrison, Dr. Ian Mackay, Lance Christie, Dr. Jill Mitten, Dick Wyman, Tim Twynham, and Braden Simmons, amongst many others, as past and present victims of this senseless hatred.
This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
From the day Richard Marsh left the Brethren in 2015, he was relentlessly pursued and harassed. His emails and social media were hacked, his private messages were stolen and shared, he was arrested by the police on trumped-up charges, he and his wife were followed everywhere by private investigators, both legal and otherwise. Elite lawyers and barristers in the UK, the USA, and Canada were hired to trip him up by any means possible. False witnesses were paid to sign fictitious affidavits which were filed with the courts, and a plot to forcibly detain him and steal his computer was only foiled by a last-minute change of heart by the man commissioned to do the job. That man was David Wallace. In early 2021, Wallace handed over to Richard the entire archive of emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls between himself and the senior PBCC leaders who were directing him in the hunt. These communications give an extraordinary window into the ruthless and malicious minds of the leaders of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Their utter disregard of the law, justice, compassion, or humanity. Today, we release for the first time a selection of these communications between hired gun David Wallace, top lawyer Gerald Shapor QC, and Plymouth Brethren Christian Church leaders Brad Mitchell, Rod Diplock, Mick Strange, and Keith Prince. First of all, we must introduce you to these key players in the Brethren's criminal game.
Gerald Shapor is a top lawyer and KC with Miller Thompson, based in Calgary, Alberta. He was counsel for the Conservative Party of Canada and counsel for the PBCC. He is a veteran anti-gay rights campaigner and a prominent member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He was also a close friend of former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper and both the lawyer and business partner of Pierre Poilievre, who will likely be Canada's next Prime Minister. Shapor has worked with prominent North American brethren such as Chuck Truan and Brad Mitchell to harass and suppress critics of the Brethren for over 20 years. Brad Mitchell is a manager in the UBT, the Universal Business Team, which is the financial wing of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. He's the president of Klondike Lubricants, a 100-employee business in British Columbia. He's the leading elder of the Vancouver congregation of the PBCC, and he's president of a PBCC charitable trust with assets of over $15 million. He has recently been made the Canadian CEO of Ox Group International, a global tool business founded and run by Dean Hales, PBCC leader Bruce Hales' second son. He is also a manager in CoShield, which is a PPE profiteering business also founded and run by Dean Hales. Rod Diplock from San Francisco is the CEO of Control Tech, which is a cash handling and security business. He's also one of the 4 USA directors of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. He's a director of the Universal Business Team, and he's a director of Shavano Consulting, which is Dean Hales' property investment company. This slide is the corporate page for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, showing the directors, and the directors are Jeff Southard, Matt Locke, Mick Strange, and Rodney Diplock. Mick Strange is the CEO of All Fasteners USA, which is the American branch of All Fasteners, a business owned by Greg Hales, one of Bruce Hales' sons. Previously, Mick was a director at UBT Accountants. Mick is also one of the 4 directors of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church in the USA. Keith Prince is the president of UBT-affiliated Ontario business Tilsonburg Tube. He is also president of the PBCC-owned Tilsonburg Meeting Room Trust, which received tax-deductible gifts of $1.4 million between 2018 and 2019. Suzanne Railton was a senior executive assistant at the Universal Business Team.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Get a Life podcast. I am Cheryl, an ex-member of the Exclusive Brethren, or the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church as are known now, from Maple Creek, Saskatchewan. And today with me on the panel is Richard Marsh, who is also an ex-member. So welcome, Richard. We have a doozy of a show today with our very special guest, David Wallace. Welcome, David, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
For those of you who don't know who David Wallace is, he is the political fixer that was hired by the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church to hunt down Richard Marsh. And we are going to take you right to the beginning of this entire evil plot, and we're going to walk you through it. I know that there's a lot of insiders in there that have never heard this story and have just been asking for us to do a podcast on this so that they can get the whole story and what happened. So I'm going to try and find words instead of tears to this insidious ordeal. And to the insiders listening and watching this, buckle up. So let's start at the beginning of this, David. So how did this all start? Who reached out to you first, I guess would be my biggest question.
Well, I was in Alberta, Canada at the time, doing a variety of different jobs for a gentleman who's extremely politically connected in Alberta. His name is Alan Hallman. He was the I guess for lack of a better word, the fixer for Premier Jason Kenney, and prior to Kenney, Ralph Klein, for many, many years. Alan had hired me on a variety of different jobs while I was in Alberta. He had started hiring me after I'd already been in Alberta on the Naheed Nenshi job, which has seen plenty of newspaper coverage. The former mayor of Calgary, now current leader of the NDP in Alberta. I had been hired by a group of individuals who I can't name due to legal handcuffs, so to speak, had hired me to get rid of the mayor, or at least set up a scenario where the mayor would be compromised. When that sort of came apart, I was about to depart Alberta. Mr. Holman filled the gap with a lot of very lucrative employment. In late 2020, he reached out to me with a name of a lawyer named Gerald Chapor, who I had heard before. He said that his friend Jerry was being engaged by a community, didn't tell me what type of community, and that they were looking for an individual who was a fraudster and had outstanding warrants for his arrest, and they were having trouble locating him. This was, again, late 2020. They sent me a file. I read it over briefly, and I accepted the job.
Perhaps if we stop there just for a moment, we can pull up some of these documents, some of the receipts that relate to what you're saying at this point in the story, Cheryl.
Okay, so explain what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so to take kind of one step back, just to set the scene as it was, from the Brethren's perspective. So immediately before they hired David Wallace was hired at the very end of 2020. And so this is an email from the middle of 2020. This is before David and the Brethren had collided. At this point, the Brethren were searching for me, and they had hired a different private investigator. They had hired an investigator called Stuart Morse of Pro West Investigation and Protection, Inc. in Calgary. And Stuart Morse was, he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. And he was trying to find me, and he had contacted my friend, Dr. Kirat Singh. And we had kind of caught Morse in a sting operation because we set up an email account pretending to be a hacker offering hacking services, offered to Morse to hack, Marsh's emails, and Stuart Morse, on behalf of his client, who we now know is the Brethren, took the bait. So this is an email from Stuart Morse to X-Cipher, which is kind of the pseudonym for this hacker, who wasn't really a hacker.
And this is what Stuart Morse is saying. So this is sort of 6 months before this all goes down. This is the Brethren's previous attempt to find me. So Stuart Morse says, "Hi, I apologise for the delay as I've been in negotiations with my client on your behalf and at the same time being respectful of the client's scepticism over the cost of something that may not meet the objective. In saying that, the client is not concerned about your monitoring skills, more so regarding whether or not you can lead the client to Mr. Marsh. Obviously, I'm not at liberty to identify my client, but you are correct to believe that the client is concerned about any criminal activity that Mr. Marsh may be involved in, as it speaks to his instability. How confident are you that Marsh can be located using your skills? And if so, do you recommend monitoring his phone or email account to meet the objective? If he is outside the UK, it is doubtful that he would be using his UK mobile. And if so, would you be able to identify his location? I'm assuming you will be able to provide his billing address and monitor incoming, outgoing calls and their location within the UK. With regards to Kenesha, that's my wife, are you suggesting that she is currently living in Canada, as she is originally from Jamaica and may have returned as a result of the pandemic? Are you able to determine her whereabouts? I appreciate your patience and understanding and look forward to your response, which it will be instrumental in moving forward. Regards, Stu Morse, Pro-West Investigation." So it's very important to grasp this, that David Wallace was not the first guy hired by the Brethren to look for me. In fact, there were several private investigators hired before Stuart Morse. This was, so for a period of maybe 2 or 3 months, Dr. Singh and I fed Stuart Morse emails, actually genuine emails from my email account, but ones that gave the impression I was in the UK. It was the plan was to kind of lead the Brethren off the track, so they were looking in the wrong continent to find me. And at some point late in, I would say, end of August in 2020, Stuart Morse realised he was being led up the garden path, and suddenly he wasn't buying any more emails. And at that point, that's kind of a silence fell over the scene, and we were wondering, well, okay, they've realised that Morse is, incompetent, and, what are they going to do next? Okay, so this is what happened next, and this is the moment that David has just been speaking about. So this is an email from Gerald Shipper, who was a QC, now a KC, I suppose, a top accredited lawyer with Miller Thompson. And he's a guy, he was the general counsel to the Conservative Party in Canada, and he was also the lawyer for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church in Canada, heavily involved in anti-gay rights activity, heavily involved in the campaign to try and prevent gay marriage being legalized, also heavily involved in suppressing previous websites like Peebs.net that were publishing allegations about the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. So this was the first document that shows Gerald Shipper hiring David Wallace on behalf of the Brethren, his clients, to hunt me down. And this is an email that has a whole bunch of attachments. And it says, this is the first of 10 pages, because there's the first page of these attachments is attached to this email. And it says, we require a skip trace on Richard Marsh. We will also require an affidavit. Gerald D. Shipper, QC, partner Miller Thompson, LLP, Calgary, Alberta. Now, to explain what was happening here, when David was initially hired, he wasn't hired exactly to find me. He was hired to provide a skip trace report, and which is, like a private investigator's report as to where someone is, and also to provide affidavits. Now, what happened was, rather than getting David to do his own, or pay David to do his own investigation at this point, or do his own research to write affidavits, they sent to David
10 pages out of a report prepared by Stuart Morse, by Pro-West Investigations, which had been prepared by Stuart Morse over the previous year. And if we go on to the next slide, we will see some of those pages which were attached to this email. Now, the numbering of the pages shows that this report had at least 68 pages, so this is just a small section of it. So this is the first page of Stuart Morse's report, and we can see in the previous email, we can see that Pro-West wasn't at liberty to disclose who his client was. But now we have this report, which is apparently sent to David Wallace. You see, his client is Brad Mitchell. And the report says, Pro-West Investigation and Protection, Inc. Investigation Update Report, date July the 10th, 2020. So, the date is exactly when Stuart Morse was requesting all these hacked emails from the hacker. And the client is Brad Mitchell. Subject is Richard Marsh and Kenesha Green. Dear Mr. Mitchell, once again, thank you for allowing Pro-West Investigation and Protection, Inc. to assist you in the above captioned matter. In accordance with your instructions, an ongoing investigation into the activities of Richard Marsh and Kenesha Green was undertaken. Okay, so next page. This isn't the whole of it. This is just some parts I've pulled out. Now, this is interesting. This is the next page. So again, it's headed Pro-West Investigation. A search of bank records, credit applications, vehicle and property searches have not provided any leads into Marsh's whereabouts. A bank record search has indicated that Marsh had 3 accounts in Regina, Saskatchewan, with approximately $2,700 in one of the accounts. Of note, he has not changed the mailing address on any of the accounts from when he resided in Regina. I mean, that's his spelling mistake. It's believed that Marsh keeps his money offshore and carries foreign credit cards. I've never had a credit card in my life. When he is in Canada, he stays in hotels and rents vehicles, also completely untrue. Marsh is extremely computer savvy, I wish I was, and uses all social media platforms available and does a good job at masking his identity. The same is said regarding current phone numbers, addresses, email addresses, or employment for Marsh. And then it says investigative details, targets, T1, Richard Jeremy Marsh, blah, blah, blah. T2, Kenesha Green, black female, married Marsh in Jamaica. R1, Green's current address. R2, possible address for Marsh. I have no idea where they got that from. That's never been there.
Oh, you weren't there.
David knows you weren't there.
R3, possible UK address and residence of Uncle Richard Marsh. And then H1, I don't know what all these codes mean, employed at Nicey's Eatery where my wife worked. So, this is just a page, probably page 2 of this investigative report that Stuart Morse, a nearly 80-page report that Stuart Morse had put together for Brad Mitchell and has now been sent, or 10 pages of it have been sent to David Wallace, for David Wallace to turn into a skip trace report, which is basically the same thing as an investigative report, and to turn it into some affidavits. Now, there's an interesting point about this page in particular. It says, a bank record search has indicated that Marsh had 3 accounts and approximately $2,700 in one account, and that bank record search revealed my email address for those accounts. Now, the interesting thing is, David will confirm this, that unless you have a warrant from a court, you can't do a bank record search. A private investigator can't search and find out what bank accounts you have, the addresses associated with those accounts, and the amount of money in those accounts. That's obviously extremely private information. So the question is, how? And the interesting thing is, this is accurate. I did have 3 accounts in Regina. I did have $2,700 in one of the accounts. And that actually gives away where they got this information from. Because the only date on which I had those 3 accounts in Regina and that money in one of those accounts was in the summer of 2017. I moved to Regina for 1 year
at the beginning of 2017, at which point I had $5,000 in my bank account. By the middle of the summer of 2017, I would have had approximately 2,700 in the account. And at the end of 2017, I left Saskatchewan and closed all the accounts. So this record they've obtained was obtained probably in August of 2017. Now, there's a very interesting point here, because in the August of 2017, I was working in Regina, and I was working a night shift, and in the day, particularly in the summer, because the air conditioning in my apartment wasn't good, I would spend the day in the city library in the middle of the town. Very nice library. And in the August of 2017, I was working with my computer, my laptop at one of the desks in the library. I walked away from the desk to take a phone call because there were other people working, and I didn't want to disturb them by talking. When I came back to my desk, my computer had been stolen. Someone had walked off with my laptop. Now, in September of 2017, a month after my laptop had been stolen, my Facebook account was accessed, because someone had the password to my Facebook account and accessed my Facebook account, locked me out of it, and also all my other social media was hacked, and my website was closed down by some party who mysteriously had obtained the passwords to all those different social media accounts. Now, of note, I got a notification from Facebook, because when someone a different computer accesses your social media, Facebook sends you a notification saying your account has been logged into from this IP address. Now, the IP address that logged into my Facebook account in the September of 2017 was an IP address that belongs to a Plymouth Brethren Christian Church owned company from the UK. Now, most IP addresses are geographical. They relate to an area. But if you've got a big business, you have your own specific IP address that belongs to you. And this particular IP address belonged to Granta Processors, which is a Brethren-owned business in the UK. So we know for certain that in September of 2017, the Brethren had passwords to all of my social media. And the obvious conclusion is that this was that whoever stole my computer was some kind of a private investigator, probably an illegal private investigator, hired by the Brethren, who had been watching me in Regina, followed me around, saw the opportunity to steal my computer, obviously passed it on to the Brethren, who used it to access my social media. And at the same time, of course, they got access to my bank statements, so they knew what bank accounts I had and the balance in the account. So, straight away we have proof of very illegal activity on the part of the Brethren, in that they have illegally accessed my bank accounts and are claiming that it was a bank record search. Yeah, so here's a
bank record search, maybe not exactly a legal one, but...
Well, I mean, I'm sure David has ways and means of doing bank record searches, but I'm equally sure that they're not legal.
You'd be correct in that assumption.
So here's another page. Here's a picture of it's actually a really nice picture of my wife. So this is a picture of me and my wife. This is part of Stu Morse's report. And it says, investigation timeline and surveillance, November the 2nd. It was confirmed that Kenesha Green is employed at Nicey's Eatery in Scarborough by KP. Now, I don't know who KP is, presumably a private investigator working for Stuart Morse, after purchasing a meal and noticing the name of Kenesha Green was on the receipt. And I mean, this whole hunt that went on where my wife was harassed and everything in Scarborough, Ontario, that's another story. But yes, it's true that private investigator, rather blatantly and obviously spent the whole day sitting in this small Jamaican restaurant and trying to purchase something so as to get a receipt that had my wife's name on it. The private investigator's, not a very smart guy, because on the first day he did it, in spite of having these nice photos, he followed the wrong girl home. I mean, it's a Jamaican restaurant. All the employees are Jamaican, right? And this poor girl, who doesn't particularly look like my wife, except having the same colour skin, was followed home by this private investigator, was very alarmed by it, reported it to the restaurant manager, and on the next day, the private investigator, got his spectacles out again and had another look and actually managed to follow the right Jamaican home. But, this just confirms the account that we've spoken about elsewhere, how my wife was followed and harassed by private investigators. Okay, so the first email was instructing David that they wanted skip trace report and affidavits. And this is where it gets very interesting, because now Gerald Chappeur, and copying in a whole bunch of other lawyers, is sending to David a draft report that condenses and makes compelling, note the coded language there, the information we received from you. David, please utilize this document for your final report. I understand you will receive further information tomorrow from the criminal records that may be available on Richard Marsh. Thank you for your assistance. Well, I don't have a criminal record.
That's signed Jerry.
Yeah, signed Gerald D. Chappeur. Yeah, signed Jerry. It's all very first name terms, isn't it?
He was very helpful. All I had to do was show up at the lawyer's office and sign my name to the report that was already done. It was quick 5K to pick it up, and then I could get to real work and go and find Richard.
What were you thinking at this point in time? Like, at this point in time, you're not realizing that this is a Christian group or anything like that, right?
No, not at all. I mean, at this point, I had received all the reports and paperwork that they had. I read through them. After the first reading through, I had a pretty good idea where Mr. Marsh would be. Stu was not exactly a genius. He had been sitting on top of Richard for quite some time. And I mean, the answers to where he was were there. I mean, he hadn't really gone anywhere. It was a little bit of a surveillance to figure out. They'd assumed that Richard had already left one location when he was still dug in like a tick, and utilizing backyards late at night to jump over hedges and fences to get where he needed to be. And I think if you looked at the phone records that they already had their answers. Yeah, I had gone back and forth. Jerry, or one of his associates, had been kind enough to write my skip trace for me. I showed up at a Miller Thompson office in the GTA and swore to it and signed it. Yeah. I'd already told these gentlemen prior to that I was not a private investigator, that I was not licensed, that I could find this man. That was one of the things that I did. I was able to find people, but it was not primarily in my wheelhouse. Yeah. I had been given the impression from Alan Holman that the situation to locate Richard was becoming desperate, that they had spent a great deal of money and had utilized police and private investigators and even ex-military at that point to find Richard, and had come up dry. So I was offered a obscene amount of money to locate him. So
just focusing on this, just like taking a pause at this document here, because there's an important point here that hasn't really been brought out in the past. Initially, you were hired to provide the skip trace and the affidavit.
Yes.
They gave you Stuart Morse's skip trace, and they just wanted you to rewrite that in your own name, so they could then submit it to the court.
Absolutely.
Now, their strategy at this point was to use a process called examination of judgment debtor, which is a legal process whereby if someone owes money and you can't find them, if you can prove to the court that they're trying to evade service, trying to evade, paying their debts, you can, in extreme circumstances, get the court to issue an arrest warrant whereby the person you're seeking either has to turn up at the court and give full details of his, address, telephone number, contact details, bank accounts, assets, or they will issue an arrest warrant for you and the police will go and look for you and bring you in. So strategy number one the Brethren had up to this point was to try and get an arrest warrant for me in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario. And I think the reason they were trying to do this in 3 different provinces, although obscenely expensive to do, is that they weren't really sure where I was. So they'll cover all the bases. They'll do these 3 provinces because they think I'm in one of these 3 provinces. In order to get that court judgment, which would say you must attend court as a judgment debtor, or we're going to put an arrest warrant out for you, they have to submit an affidavit to the court that shows that they've made every effort to find this guy and that the guy is evading service, and they really need to show that he's a guy of, dangerous and unpleasant character, and the only way to deal with this man is to send the police in to get him because, life and limb is threatened. So now if we move on, so they sent to David to sign draft skip trace reports to try and reinforce the idea that I was a dangerous character. So if we move on to the next page, you can see what they sent David to sign and submit to the court. Okay. Now, you may say, well, why didn't they use Stuart Morse? Why didn't they use Stuart Morse to do this? The reason is that Stuart Morse was already compromised. They realized that Stuart Morse's hacker was actually a friend of mine, and they realized that if they went to the court with a document from Stuart Morse, I would respond by producing 33 emails from Stuart Morse in which he was soliciting hacked emails and hacked details. They couldn't use the name of Stuart Morse, so they needed another name to put at the bottom of the report. So they wanted to use David Wallace's name, and they needed someone who was, pardon me, David, but a little unscrupulous, someone who wasn't too firmly attached to the letter of the law, because this is all very dodgy from a legal perspective. And then they hit on a problem that David Wallace was not a private investigator. In fact, David Wallace had only been released from jail 2 years previously. And as a person with a criminal record, he couldn't legally be a private investigator. So they hit on a solution to this. Sorry, David, to spill your dirt, but it's true. So Gerald Chapur has a solution to this. He can't say that David's a private investigator. So Gerald Chapur invents a company, invents a non-existent corporation. And this is what Gerald Chapur writes at the top of his report. He says, private and confidential, this report provided by four-wall investigative services at the client's request, named herein, is confidential and to the client's use only, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes on, investigative details, subject, Richard March, and so on and so on. So what they've done is, because they can't use David's name as a private investigator, they invent a completely fictitious company called Four Wall Investigative Services, and they put David Wallace down as investigations coordinator to kind of excuse the fact that they can't quote his private investigator license. This is an email that comes in. So now we're kind of into January 2021. So this is an email from Brad Mitchell of Klondike Lubricants. He's a director of the Universal Business Team. He's a director of a business which is owned by Dean Hales, Bruce Hales' son, and he's probably the most influential Brethren member in the whole of Canada. So,
like, he's going to listen to this and his ego's going to be like, yeah, I am prominent.
Yes.
Not prominent in the good ways, Brad. Not prominent in the good ways.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're at the point where Gerald Chapur has supplied to David Wallace the drafts of the documents that he wants David to sign as if they were his own investigation rather than Stu Morse's investigation. Documents that purportedly come from a completely fictitious private investigation company. And so this is an email now from Brad Mitchell, prominent leader of the Plymouth Brethren, to Gerald Chapur, which David was copied into. And this is January the 17th, 2021. Jerry, could I get an update ASAP today on whether you've been able to make progress since our last call on Richard Marsh? Was thinking of moving forward on the Saskatchewan court order and the sheriff's on his Saskatchewan bank accounts. Global is pretty urgent on an update. Thanks very much. Kind regards, Brad Mitchell, Klondike Lubricant. So, as I was saying, their strategy at this point was to use court orders actually in 3 different provinces. This is just referring to the Saskatchewan one, which was further ahead than the others, to, basically drag me into court or get an arrest warrant for me. There's a reply to this email, which is the next slide. Okay, so from Gerald Shapur to Brad Mitchell, re-RM, update today. Let us talk at your convenience. Is now a good time? I can advise that we're in process of the following. 1. Through the Sheriff's Office in Saskatchewan, causing enforcement of garnishes and writs. 2. Preparing an application for an order requiring Richard Marsh to attend an examination in aid of execution, which is what I was talking about, an examination of a debtor. And 3. Preparing an application for the registration of the UK judgment in Alberta. And this is from Gerald Shapur. So the background to this is, I had some debts from the UK because I'd lost a court case in the UK, and the court had said, well, you've got to pay the other party's costs. And so they registered that cost judgment. They registered that cost judgment in different provinces in Canada. And this is what they were using to try and make out that I was a big debtor, and they had to use the court to hunt me down. So we can see from here that they were well ahead with this process in Saskatchewan, and they were starting to register it in Alberta. And we also know that they were doing the same thing in Ontario. So at this point, there was a change in plan. This is where it gets really interesting, because what they realized is that even if they succeeded in persuading the courts that, that they should have an arrest warrant for me, that process would take them about a year to go through. And at some point at this time, they got a message from Global, or from the Hales family, that no, a year's too long, we need to hunt this guy down now. So at this point, and this is January the 17th, 2021, there was a change of plan, and they're offering David Wallace a retainer to hunt me down. So this is not just to prepare a report based on Stu Morse's investigation. At this point, they say, David, find this guy and we'll pay you a retainer to do it. And so this is an email from Gerald Shapur to David Wallace. The client is very happy with your previous assistance. That presumably refers to the affidavits and so on. Please call me. They would like to speak to you about a retainer to track this guy down. Gerald Shapur, QC, providing services on behalf of a professional corporation, partner Miller Thompson, LLP. This is very professional. This is like hiring a criminal to provide false affidavits under a false name and to hunt down an innocent man. Good for Jerry. Okay, so on the same day as Gerald Shapur messages David Wallace, he sends a message to Brad Mitchell, and a new character enters the scene here. The message is copied to Rod Diplock. Rod Diplock is a very wealthy, very prominent member of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church from San Francisco in the USA. He is a director of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church.
If anybody watched podcast 110 with that Priestley Visit audio, Rod Diplock was paired with Mick Strange in that brutal interrogation they did on a teenager. So here's Rod Diplock again.
Yeah. So the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church is incorporated in the USA, and it has 3 directors, and one of them is Rod Diplock. So this is like right at the top. Rod Diplock is also a director of Shavano Consulting, which is a business owned by Dean Hales, son of Bruce Hales, who's the leader of the Plymouth Brethren. So we now got Brad Mitchell, top man in Canada, Rod Diplock, top man in the USA, on the team hunting me down. And Gerald Shapur's message to these 2 gentlemen is, David Wallace, the PI in Toronto, is available to speak anytime today. He has a great strategy to share. Gerald Shapur. Although they know he's not a PI, this is what they're calling him. So, yeah. I don't know why they said you're in Toronto, because you weren't in Toronto, but you were in Ontario, I suppose.
I was in Ontario.
Yeah.
I was confident after reading the reports and conversations with Alan Holman, who was friends with Gerald Shapur.
Yes.
I was confident that I could locate you quickly. And so I struck a nice financial deal with these guys. They had assured me that the warrants that they had promised would be in place. So I obtained photographic evidence that I had you in my sights.
Yeah.
And basically about a week or so after that, that's when things went haywire. And I discovered that there were no warrants.
Yes.
And what their real intentions were. And
yes. I mean, they told you at this point that they had warrants, while the fact was they were at least a year off from getting warrants, even with the fake affidavits that you had provided them. So
Yeah,
they were lying to you as well as to the law and everyone else, and probably lying to themselves.
I told them, too, that once that I had you in sight to do what I needed to do to bring you in, that I needed those warrants available immediately. And they assured me that they would be available immediately, because part of the strategy was to use an associate of mine who had extremely strong ties to Toronto Police Service, and use the Toronto Police Service to execute those warrants when you were basically in the box, so to speak.
Yes.
So I was very concerned, because this was highly illegally or legally questionable to begin with. I was extremely concerned that any arrest that took place was done by the book, so there wouldn't be any legal blowback on me. I mean, what eventually was proposed to me amounted to kidnapping, which when I took a hard out, so to speak.
So at this point, we've got two strategies. They're continuing with their efforts to get search warrants, but they'd also now paid, in addition to having paid you a very substantial sum just for signing affidavits and reports that they had written, which again, of course, you can't pay people to write an affidavit. You can only pay their costs. You can't actually pay people to give evidence in court. So I mean, that alone was illegal. They're now also paying you separately by separate means to hunt me. Now, the payment for the affidavits was coming directly from Gerald Chappur or through Alan Hallman. But the payment for hunting me down, this was paid directly by the Brethren, as we'll see later. So this is a reply to the previous email. This is from Rod Diplock, and it's from Control Tech USA. So one of his businesses, as well as the Shivano Consulting, is Control Tech USA, which is a massive cash handling business. You know, it supplies the little bags you put cash in for banks, and
I think that's out of New Jersey.
A lot of supplies for casinos and so on. It's a dodgy kind of business.
Was that out of New Jersey, that company? I think it was.
I think they got an office there, but it's basically San Francisco, I think. But they've got an office in Canada now. They've got a depot in Canada. So
I just want to say that this is addressed to Brad Mitchell and Gerald Chappur.
Yeah, so this is from Rod Diplock, from the director of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church in the USA, to Brad Mitchell and to Gerald Chappur. And it's obviously copied to David or forwarded to David afterwards. So re-RM update today. That's great. Can we set up a call this afternoon for 2 Pacific time? Kind regards, Rod Diplock, CEO, Control Tech. And now we go on, we see how they set up that call. So now another player comes in, and this is Suzanne Railton. Suzanne Railton is a top executive assistant at Universal Business Team. Now, Universal Business Team is Bruce Hales's business, and it's the financial core of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. In fact, you could reasonably say that Universal Business Team owns Plymouth Brethren Christian Church.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So again, the Brethren have denied any knowledge of any of this happening. They've actually sent a legal letter saying, we had no knowledge of any of this happening at all. This email is from Suzanne Railton to David Wallace, and it is an invitation to join a scheduled Zoom meeting. And the meeting URL, note this, the URL for the Zoom meeting is ubteam.zoom.us. So this is actually a Universal Business Team Zoom meeting that they've arranged to discuss my apprehension here.
And if we want to just update everybody, if you haven't been keeping up with the articles that are going on about UBT, the UBTA department was shut down recently due to
UBTA, their accounts department, which is the brains of the whole thing, the financial heart and brains of UBT is UBTA. We'll speak more about UBTA later because the UBTA director comes into the scene fairly soon. So they had this Zoom meeting, and they obviously went over David's strategy. This is another email from Brad Mitchell. This is a very interesting email. So from Brad Mitchell, now this time Brad Mitchell is using his UBT email address. So Brad Mitchell's a director of UBT. To Bread and Circus, which is one of David Wallace's email addresses. Subject, I am sharing cell phone records with you. Attachment, cellphonerecords.pdf. Dave, please see the attached phone record. We will organise funds here soon. One of my guys is in hospital, so he normally wires. Anything else you need from us? Be good to get a game plan from me once you have it. Kind regards, Brad Mitchell. Now, the attachment to this email is really alarming, and that's the next slide. And David will remember receiving this. This is a list of phone numbers, and it's dated July 15th, 2020. This is from 6 months previously. Received list of numbers for cell phone 437-239-2754 Kenesha Green. She's changed the number since, so you don't need to call her. For the period of November the 1st, 2020 to December the 22nd, 2020. Okay, and then there's a list of how many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's a list of about 20 phone numbers, and for each phone number, it says the number of times it was called. So some of them were called 10 times, some of them were called 5 times at one time. And then there's a column that gives for several of them, or most of them, the actual name it was called. And so this is my wife's phone log. This is a log of my wife's phone account. And we don't even get itemized phone bills. It was just the cheapest possible phone plan. We didn't have access to this information. So this can only have been obtained illegally by some form of bribery with the phone company, with Freedom Mobile, or whatever it was, TalkTalk, I think we were using back then. And that somehow Brad Mitchell had, obviously, this is obviously completely illegal, complete breach of privacy, breach of charter rights of privacy in Canada. It obtained my wife's private phone log, and it shows she phoned Centennial College 4 times, Nicey's Eatery, where she worked 7 times, the Westin Prince Hotel 5 times. That's because she was trying to get a job there.
Pizza.
And well, pizza 10 times.
But there's the police on here.
You were the one eating the pizza.
Yeah, so Toronto Police 42 Division Detective Office 10 times, and Toronto Police 42 Division 6 times. Now, those calls to the police were made because this is the period when she was being stalked through Toronto by Stuart Morse's operatives, and she was being followed on the bus to school. She was being followed to work. She was having PIs hanging around outside her workplace and waiting for her to come out. And of course, when she was stalked, she would phone the police and report it. And the police would, sometimes they would come and they would, send the private investigator packing. But this actually shows just how intense that surveillance and harassment of my wife was. And inside 1 month, she had to call the police 16 times to get private investigators off her back.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So, David, in your opinion, in your line of work with what you used to do, how would someone obtain a phone record log like this?
There's only 2 ways. You either have to have somebody on the inside in the courts, judiciary, policing, or somebody inside the mobile carrier. With the Brethren, knowing what I know now, the odds were, I would believe for this type of report, this is something that came from law enforcement. That's my belief.
I mean, one place it may have come from is actually Stuart Morse himself, because this is the period when Stuart Morse was operating. Stuart Morse is an ex-cop, an ex-Calgary
police service.
And of course, he has a whole load of contact inside the police force. Of course, it's completely illegal for anyone inside the police force to obtain information like this and pass it outside. But it's quite possible that Stuart Morse got this from one of his police contacts inside the Calgary Police, which is a notoriously corrupt police force, David, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So this is again the bank records they obtained illegally, the phone records they've obtained illegally, and this is a top KC, top leading Canadian lawyer, counsel to the Conservative Party, and a mainstream Christian church, we're told.
And this was attached to Brad Mitchell's email.
Yeah,
just
Brad
so we
Mitchell
remind everybody that this was
Yeah.
attached.
This was the attachment to Brad Mitchell's email to David Wallace. Okay, so now Brad Mitchell is contacting David Wallace by WhatsApp. And this is about the funds. But it's Brad Mitchell. We're setting up a wire tomorrow. And note the date on this. It's January the 20th, 2021. So this is this little section here which relates to how David was paid. So Brad Mitchell and Rod Diplock are promising to wire him money. And this is an email from David Wallace under his pseudonym of John Nadder to Westwind 44. Now, Westwind 44, that's one of Rod Diplock's private email addresses. Westwind is the name of a now One School Global school trust that was set up back when it was Sterling Education in the USA. So Rod Diplock was obviously a trustee of that Children's Education Trust, and this is one of his email addresses. So this is David Wallace to Rod Diplock, invoice for week ending February the 7th. Here's the breakdown of this week's expenses. Weekly fee, 5,000 Canadian dollars. Telecom expenses, 2,300 Canadian dollars. Edmonton manpower, 500 Canadian dollars. Total 7,800 Canadian. David. Okay, and then underneath this, there's the reply or the forwarding of the same email from Westwind 44, so from Rod Diplock, to Frestey, in inverted commas, Frestey, subject, re-RM, Brad. Please advise. So we can see from this that Frestey is some kind of a nickname for Brad Mitchell. And, if anyone out there knows why Brad Mitchell is called Frestey, please email us and we'll publicize the fact. And so they're kind of figuring out amongst them how they're going to pay David Wallace while trying to keep their hands clean. And we'll see in the next item how they did that. So this is a section from David Wallace's TD bank statement from the period. And what we see is payments coming in from Tillsonburg Tube, February the 17th, 2021, $3,500. February the 9th, 2021, Tillsonburg Tube, $7,800. January the 31st, 2021, Tillsonburg Tube, $5,000. January the 21st, 2021, Tillsonburg Tube, $5,000, as well as money coming in from Jonathan Dennis, which is another story. You can Google Jonathan Dennis and see what he was up to. Another customer of yours, David, and Hallman and Associates, which is of course Alan Hallman. So the payments to David Wallace were not made directly by either Rod Diplock or Brad Mitchell. They were made by yet another prominent leading member of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, which is Keith Prince, or also known as the Prince of Darkness, who's a Brethren business leader from Tillsonburg in Ontario. He owns this business called Tillsonburg Tube. He's a trustee of the local meter room trust, which has about $1.5 million sitting in it. And he's also the guy who made a $7,500 donation to a third-party advertiser, which spent the money putting up huge billboard posters attacking Justin Trudeau at the last election, and subsequently received a $300,000 grant from the Conservative Ontario government for his business, Tillsonburg Tube. So that's Keith Prince, and we'll see more about Keith Prince later. But this is how David was paid for this investigation. Okay, so now we're kind of taking a jump back, and this is again relates to the affidavits that Gerald Shapur was paying David to sign, to fill in and sign. So this is from Miller Thompson office in Saskatchewan, Joel Chappell's leading the operation. He's in Calgary, but they're trying to register this court order. They're trying to get this affidavit against me in Saskatchewan. So it's from Brooklyn Feasel, Miller Thompson, to David Wallace. Subject, draft affidavit. Attachment, Saskatchewan draft affidavit of private investigator, document number, so on and so on. And it says, "Hi David, as discussed, please see enclosed the draft affidavit. Please review and revise as you see fit. Please ensure that all the information you include is directly within your personal knowledge and, of course, truthful." I have enclosed the email I previously referenced for your review. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Brooklyn Feasel, Associate, Miller Thompson, LLP, Regina, Saskatchewan. So this is the draft affidavit that they sent to David Wallace. Now, of course, normally you ask someone for an affidavit, they write the affidavit.
This blew me over the top.
This affidavit was written by Joel Chappell with little gaps and lines in for David to fill in odd words. And they were paying him $5,000 to fill in this affidavit.
Good work if you can get it.
Good work if you can get it. Yeah, it's a good gig if you can get it. Okay, so this is an affidavit. This is a formal document. I'm reading it out for the sake of people who are not actually, just listening and haven't got the visual. It's Form 13.31, court file number, QBG number, that's Queen's Bench, that's the Court of the Queen's Bench in Saskatchewan. The court file number, Court of the Queen's Bench for Saskatchewan. There's some things have been redacted here. The applicant's name is redacted. The respondent, that's the person they're charging, is Richard Marsh. And then it says affidavit of David Wallace. I, David Wallace of blank blank, this is space for him to fill in his address, make oath and say or affirm. 1. I am a private investigator with, and then there's a blank space with a little highlighted tab for him to fill in the name of his private investigator business, Formal Investigations, of course, which doesn't actually exist.
And he's not really a private investigator, right?
Yeah. He's not even a private investigator. So, yeah. And then number 2, I was retained by, and then there's a blank space for him to fill in who he is retained by, in or around, and then there's a space for him to put on the date when he was retained by the applicant, to investigate the whereabouts of Richard Marsh for the purpose of various legal proceedings. 3. It is my opinion that Richard Marsh has been actively hiding his whereabouts for years for the purpose of evading service of any documents related to court proceedings. Okay, then next screen is this. I haven't put the whole thing in, it's very long. I've just put in some sections of it. So this is line 6 of the same affidavit. After significant efforts, I have recently located Richard Marsh in or around blank space and a tab saying, David, fill this in. 7. My research indicated that Richard Marsh was residing at this address with his wife. 8. During my attendance at the above address on February the 2nd, 2021, I observed Richard Marsh, and then there's a blank space, and then there's like a highlighted tab saying, add further details, i.e. moving boxes. This led me to believe that Richard Marsh was moving away from the above note address. 9. After briefly observing Richard Marsh, I approached him in an attempt to seek his cooperation. 10. I observed what I believed were friends of Richard Marsh with him at this time. 11. My approaching Richard Marsh and his friends quickly escalated into acts of physical violence against both me and my associate present at the time. Note, confirm and add details. 12. As a result of the altercation, both my associate and I suffered various bruises and 2 black eyes. Note, confirm and add details. Now, this, needless to say, is a complete fabrication. David Wallace never observed me moving boxes at any address, ever. He never approached me to seek my cooperation. We never had a fight. I didn't have friends with me. No one had black eyes. No one had bruises. The whole thing is not only completely fictional and made up, it's also highly improbable because if you consider David Wallace was like hired as a private investigator, if you're a private investigator and you finally see someone that you're supposed to be investigating, you don't approach them and seek their cooperation. You watch them and find out where they're going. You don't go and pick a fight with the guy. This account is completely fictitious, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was creative writing at its finest. I looked at it, laughed, and signed it, whatever.
So we now have the private investigator who isn't a private investigator belonging to the private investigation company that doesn't exist, producing a completely fictitious affidavit that clearly states that Richard Marsh is resident at a completely fictitious address and had a completely fictitious fight with a fictitious private investigator, resulting in fictitious black eyes and bruises to both him and his associate. I mean, I would add that if I did get into a fight with David Wallace, I think I would come off an awful lot worse, because he's one tough bugger, and I would be hightailing it out of there as fast as my legs could carry me. So this is what David was paid $5,000 to sign, and as he said, it's good work if you can get it. Okay, so this is the bottom of the same affidavit. Line 19. I believe the best chance for enforcement against Richard Marsh is to have him appear for an examination for the purpose of disclosing his assets. Well, it wouldn't take long to disclose my assets. 20. I make this affidavit in support of an application seeking leave to proceed directly to an examination of judgment debtor sworn before me via electronic means this blank day of February 2021. So this is the level of honesty of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church and their lawyers.
Were red flags coming up for you at this point, David?
Yeah, they were starting to come up. I mean, I had located Richard fairly rapidly, already using the tools that ex-cop there, Stu Morse, had already had. Some other names had been kicked off. Dennis Ragg had come up, so I geofenced his house. Wasn't long to discover where Richard was. I also used a source I had within the CRA to do a little bit of check on Richard's tax return, which certainly narrowed things down for me. So I was just about ready to go, but these flags were popping up. So I decided to look into Richard myself and find out exactly who he was. And that's when I came across I believe it was Plebes, Richard's blog site, and all of a sudden things had taken on a completely different complexion. And once I had provided photographic evidence to these people that I had located Richard, I was still being a little cagey on his exact whereabouts because, of course, I was averaging 5-10 G's a week with these guys. That's when they hit me up with another proposal about the sitting Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah,
my back was up at this point because things weren't starting to add up.
Yeah, you were starting to question, scratch the head and be like...
The kind of stuff with the affidavits and so on was probably, a kind of the low-level kind of criminality that you were familiar with in the rat-fucking business of dragging down politicians.
Standard operating procedure.
There was a sense at this point that there was something a lot dirtier and darker than mere politics behind this.
Yeah, it didn't make
fair
sense.
to say.
To throw this much in terms of resources, the individuals who were involved, such as a Gerald Japor, various police detectives who I had access to, databases, people like Brad Mitchell and Rod Diplock, who, once I did my background on them, they seemed far too high profile to be worried about a petty fraud.
Collecting a debt.
As they portrayed you. So there was definitely a lot of alarm bells going off by this point.
So this is an email from Westwind 44, who, as we know, is Rod Diplock, to David Wallace. David, I called Brad tonight, and he said that the wire missed yesterday, but is going tomorrow morning. Sorry, I've been out of pocket and trying to catch up. This is Rod. Also, I asked Brad to try and get a hold of you tonight. Probably a bit late there. Now, can we loop the wagons together in the morning and discuss where we are, please. But this email just kind of amused me because you can sense the mentality of the Brethren posse that was out hunting me, is that they think they're these kind of Wild West gangsters out in the desert hunting down, bad Indians or something, and they're going to loop the wagons together and see where we are. And you can imagine them kind of crouching behind the barrels, with their muzzle loaders, looking out for baddies on the horizon, as with their millions and millions of dollars and the police and the law and everyone else against me, they hunt down the dangerous outlaw Richard Marsh. It's just this kind of mentality of, we're out there hunting the baddies, So I don't think Brad actually meant to say was out of pocket. Rod was meant to say was out of pocket. I can't imagine Rod being out of pocket. I think he probably meant he was out of town. But
well, if he was out of pockets, mine were overflowing by that point, thanks to these guys.
Well, yeah, exactly. But this next email is, and this is what David was just mentioning before. Now another assignment comes along for David Wallace, and this doesn't actually relate to me at all. They've realized that David Wallace has got a very unique skill set in the political arena, and of course the Brethren have very strong political interests. So they're now wondering whether they can get David to help them with a little political problem that the Brethren have, the political problem being Justin Trudeau, who they don't like, because they like to have right-wing politicians who are in their pocket running the country, not left-wing politicians who aren't interested in doing deals with them. And so this is February the 14th, 2021. This is an email from Brad Mitchell to David Wallace, to Suzanne Railton, and to Rod Diplock, meeting with David and blank. Right? This is an associate of David's that we're redacting his name from here. So Suzanne, can you set up a Zoom meeting for the parties above? We will need to speak tomorrow. There is one other party. David will have the contact information. Kind regards, Brad Mitchell. And then the reply from David Wallace is, to Brad Mitchell, re-meeting with David. Nice to meet you, Suzanne. Blank's email address is, he gives the email address. He's available to speak at 4 p.m. Ontario time tomorrow, if that's agreeable to all parties. Thank you, David. So you had this Zoom meeting with these various high-level Brethren parties, David. What was it they were wanting to talk to you about?
Well, by this point, Mr. Mitchell and Diplock were overjoyed once they had received the photographic evidence of your existence in Ontario. So they had been speaking with Alan Holman, and Alan Holman had filled them in on exactly what I did for a living. And they came up with the bright idea that perhaps we could sit and discuss, and I could come up with a scenario which would lead to the eventual removal of Justin Trudeau. You have to keep in mind at this point in time, Justin Trudeau was still, they considered unassailable in that position. They were cycling through leaders. At this point, I believe it had gone from Scheer to O'Toole. And the prospects in the near future, they felt that Trudeau wasn't going anywhere. So the meeting that they had arranged were to loosely discuss scenarios and what resources and how much it would cost for me to set up a situation which would lead to the removal of Justin Trudeau as the Prime Minister of Canada.
And the kind of thing they were talking about, and I think Brad Mitchell actually bragged about this as having financed this operation, is a few years previously there had been a scandal in some of the less credible right-wing news outlets.
Chronicle, I believe it was.
Yeah, the Buffalo Chronicle, I think it was, claiming that Justin Trudeau had to leave. But before Justin Trudeau was a member of Parliament or Prime Minister, he was a teacher in a private school in somewhere on the West Coast, wasn't it? And he left, I think he left the school as a teacher partway through the term. And there was a sort of scandal that never hit the mainstream media, but was just kind of circulated on the dodgy right-wing news outlets, saying that the reason Justin Trudeau had to leave that school is that he had had an affair with one of the students in the school, with an underage girl in the school, and this had all been covered up and hush money had been paid. And Brad Mitchell was actually boasting that he and the Brethren had been behind the publication of this article.
Yes.
And indeed, if you look up the editor of the Buffalo Chronicle at the time, he was actually offering to publish articles for a fee. So, if you wanted to publish some scandal about a politician, you could pay the editor of the Buffalo Chronicle and he would publish it, no questions asked.
Yes.
Because the publication house was located in the USA, which made it very hard to sue them for defamation from Canada because of the freedom of speech thing. So the tone of the conversation was, well, David, can you engineer some kind of a scandal that would be sufficient to bring Justin Trudeau down and give the Conservatives a chance to get into power? Is that essentially the tone of the conversation?
And it's important to realize that the associate who was with the meeting, we won't mention his name, but he is known internationally as someone who could certainly help arrange that. The individual has an intelligence background in a foreign country. He's a Canadian national, but certainly somebody who's known both publicly and privately as someone who does this type of work. So they were certainly not playing.
No. And if there are any two people on the planet that can do it, it would be you and your associate.
Absolutely.
So they were giving you a blank check to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
This just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart because my family's in there and they totally are so gullible that this kind of shit is going on. And I apologize. I'm going on a Cheryl rant here. It's been a few podcasts since I've had one. But this is a mainstream Christian church who in all of the last articles of The Guardian, while their research, The Guardian is investigating One School Global, the PBCC's private school. And you go back and you read these articles and the absolute lies that the spokesperson gives out. And yet we have actual freaking receipts. And the man himself who sat down at this Zoom call, sitting here thinking that they had the power to take out the Prime Minister of Canada. Like, to the insiders right now, get that through your head. Why the hell are you going and breaking bread with these people? And when I was going through this shit, I mean, I've heard about this story. I watched the podcast that you did on Blackballed and the other podcast. So I knew this story, but it's just, to me, I'm a little riled up due to the Guardian articles and the spokespersons that have come on there and lied through their frickin' teeth. And then we sit down and review all this again. And my blood was boiling this morning. I didn't even know how I was going to sit down and do this podcast. Do I cry? I know if I ever get a chance to talk, I know I'm going to blow, but like my nieces and nephews, my family is stuck inside here, totally believing the bullshit that is coming out of their mouths. When in behind these curtains, we have actual receipts of them trying to plan to take down the Prime Minister of Canada. Absolutely evil, insanity business that they have got their hands into. All I say to you guys is it's something that Richard had said on the podcast Growing Up in Polygamy was about the Titanic. Like there was only enough boats for half of them. I do. Like I am at the point now, get the hell out. Just get out. Like you can't, the lies that are happening inside there is a tiny iota of the lies that are actually going on.
It's the Stockholm Syndrome, right? I mean, the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church is not a church. What it is a very sophisticated criminal organization that poses as a religious organization. It takes advantage of people who are born into this faith. That's the only way you can become part of it. They're born into this faith, and they are used as economic drivers, business tools. They're used to generate wealth for a criminal organization. And it's difficult because the members of the church can't see that because they've psychologically been conditioned since birth to believe the bullshit that they're told. Whereas the management, let's call it the Hales of the world, this guy's nothing more than an obese crime boss. He's certainly not a handpicked by God or the Grand Poobah, whoever you want to talk about. It's the same situation with the Church of Scientology. I did a few talks for them in Clearwater, Florida years ago. Same sort of situation. I do have to say, they never asked me to kidnap anybody or take out any political leaders. Yeah. So they're a step ahead on that respect. But what really set it off for me is these gentlemen asked for this job to be done on a Zoom call. Zoom is notoriously unsecure. These conversations end up in many hands. The Five Eyes monitored them. So I knew when they made this approach to me that automatically I had to distance myself, because there would be intelligence agencies, not only in this country, but other countries who would have immediate access to this Zoom call and information. And they do. I've been told through my contacts that the RCMP and CSIS both have a copy of the actual Zoom recording that took place between Rodney Diplock, Brad Mitchell, Mick Strange, myself, and the other individual. So very dangerous. Not only arrogance and foolishness, but very, very dangerous to think that a foreign entity was attempting to arrange the overthrow of a duly elected government over a Zoom call. It's pretty frightening.
Because, only one of the participants here was actually Canadian. Rod Diplock is American. And you mentioned Mick Strange. I'm glad you did. I've forgotten. Mick Strange was also on this call. Now, Mick Strange.
Yeah, I'm going to insert the clip. I'm going to insert a clip here, right here, where I want you to listen to what Mick Strange is talking like to this teenager. And then you can grasp exactly how David is explaining that this is just a criminal organization. It really is just a criminal organization. And these men are ruthless. They are evil, ruthless men. So I'm just going to answer that. So have a listen to this and make your own judgment on these criminal men that are just out for wealth.
And I can tell you now, you go to jail first and the last question's later, okay? You think I'm being funny? Play fast and loose with us, and you'll find out what it really is.
Mick, I'm not here to play games. Like I said...
Right. Well, get yourself right, you stupid idiot. Get yourself right.
Mick.
You think you want to go to hell? You want to go to hell? Do you know what hell is? Has your father ever taught you?
Yes. Yes, he has.
Well, don't muck around. Don't be smart to me. Don't be smart to the rest of us on the phone. Get yourself right, and you better get yourself right fast.
I fully agree with that.
I just want to reiterate one thing, is that I'm not naive. I know if I actually did do any of these things...
Listen to me. You're a stupid, naive idiot, okay?
Okay, well...
You're a stupid, dumb, naive idiot.
Well,
you think you're smarter than us? You think you're smarter than Mr. Hale? You think you're smarter than the system we've set on? You're not, okay?
I'm not. I never said that.
You're dumb.
I'm dumb.
You're dumb. You're dumb, okay? And if you don't wake up to yourself, you'll end up with people like Pilate in the lake of fire.
Oh, goodness.
Do you want to go there?
Mick.
Do you want to go there?
Mick.
So that's Mick Strange, and this is a call actually with Mick Strange and Rod Diplock, who are both participants in this call about Justin Trudeau. This is them dealing with a little matter of a young Brethren member who was also a UBT employee, who they were literally dragging over the coals because of some alleged misdemeanor of his. But another thing that's very important about Mick Strange is Mick Strange was a director of UBTA, which is UBT Accountants. Now, UBT is the big umbrella group that embraces the whole of the Brethren ecosystem, the whole of the Brethren finances. It's their telecommunications, it's their phones, their computers, their household supplies, their supermarkets. Within UBT, the financial heart of UBT, the brains of it, is UBTA, which does the accounts and provides top-level accounting advice, or one might say tax evasion advice, to all the top Brethren businesses, and actually connects all the Brethren business together into a kind of a virtual giant corporation. Now, after the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, raided UBT headquarters, what was that, a couple of months ago now?
Yep.
UBTA suddenly closed their doors. They said, we're not trading anymore, we'll finish off the accounts for our customers, and then we're closing down, we're gone. So you can when an entity gets raided by the ATO go in, they take away the computers, they take away the records, they unlock the filing cabinets, they take away all the records, and then the financial heart of that organization suddenly, without giving a reason, shuts its doors. You can see that, the lights are going out in Bruce Hales's financial empire. So Mick Strange was a director of UBTA, which puts him, as I said, right at the top of the tree, and he's an Australian. So this is an Australian, an American, and a Canadian conspiring to bring down the Prime Minister of Canada. Okay, so at this point, this is the point in time where David realizes just how serious it is. So at this point in this kind of sequence of events, there's all these kind of things going on together, and at this point, David has a conversation with Brad Mitchell and others where they ask him to do something that really rings the alarm bells. And it's at this point that David makes the kind of now famous phone call where he's warning me to get out of Dodge because these people are after me. So, David, we're going to play the recording of the phone call, but perhaps before we do that, just tell us what that conversation was with Brad Mitchell that led you to decide to call me and warn me to run.
Yeah, Brad was a very odd guy when I would talk to him. He's a very unassuming looking individual. He's, well, he was at the time, a little fat guy, very nondescript, but there was an absence of emotion or it's hard to put my finger on, but when you would have a conversation with this individual, it was like he was an empty shell. There was nothing there. Just he had no regard for anybody's personal safety or he referred to a Karat Singh, Richard's friend and associate, and these are his words, not mine. He called him a packy. He used racist terms against Richard's wife, against just the way he spoke, the language, the threats of violence, the actual glee. He'd also had another business matter where he was supplying PPE equipment to a gentleman in Texas that he couldn't collect his money on. He had asked me to retain a Hell's Angel. Actually, a gentleman named Chuck Zito used to be the one of the top Hell's Angels guys, an actor now, I believe.
Yeah.
He asked me to put him in touch with him, which I did. Brad,
unbelievable.
Yeah, Brad is there was something chilling about the man, and he left no doubt to me. Once I told them, okay, I need the warrants. We have Richard in sight. He told me in a phone call that there would be a rather substantial bonus wired to me immediately if I would seize Richard's laptop, grab Richard, and that I would be provided with a phone number and a team would show up to collect Richard and his laptop, his hard drive. I was out at that point. I don't do that sort of work. I made it very, very clear that that was something that I was not interested in doing. In fact, I told him I didn't want the job anymore. That's not how this was going to proceed. And they, of course, kept offering more and more money on top. I think it was up to 150 grand at that point as a bonus. I felt I had to warn Richard, but I also had concerns that I was being monitored by that point. So I made the decision to call his friend Karat Singh, who I knew would relay the message immediately, which was basically to try to tell Richard without telling him, look, I know where you are, get the hell out. Just leave, go.
Okay, let's listen to this again. I just want to refresh David's memory on it.
The Exclusive Brethren, aka the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, claimed to be a mainstream Christian church. Led by Australian Bruce Hales, its 53,000 members donate vast sums of tax-exempt money to the church's charitable trusts every year. Millions of those dollars are spent on aggressive lawyers and private investigators to track, monitor, and harass ex-members who escape the cult's coercive control. The sheer scale of abuse has been kept out of the public eye with intensive PR campaigns, lawsuits, and political influence, but now their luck has run out. On February 4th, 2021, a friend of ours, Dr. Karat Singh from Edmonton, received a call from a private investigator working for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. He was being paid $10,000 a week by a manager of the church's finance wing, Universal Business Team, UBT, to hunt down, rob, and kidnap PBCC escapee and outspoken critic Richard Marsh. In an intense phone call, the private investigator lifted the curtain on a world of malice, sleaze, and crime. What follows is the audio of that call.
Overlapping, and it's very strange that these guys picked me out of a hat.
Yeah.
And they're throwing me obscene. I mean, nobody pays 10 G's a week to chase down a guy to serve papers.
Yeah.
They sent me an email, and they told me that if I can locate this guy before I do anything or call in a sheriff, they want me to see if I can stake the place out, confiscate his laptop, and then call in this number. They said they've got a team. So I'm thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into here? You know, these are not normal people, and I'm doing all this research, and it leads back to these wacko religious freaks.
Yeah.
And these people out of Vancouver, it doesn't make any sense. And there's heavy money behind these guys.
Yeah. So how does this guy Mitchell fit in? How did he?
This is my contact. His name is Brad, and he's been calling me. And every time he gets on the phone, he puts me on pause, and he's calling out. He's got some English guy on the phone.
Brad Mitchell of Vancouver, Canada, owns Klondike Lubricants and is also a manager at UBT, the business arm of the cult. Mitchell is also president of the Christians Gospel Society, a Brethren-owned charity in British Columbia which has assets listed of $15,224,059.
He's got another guy on the phone, and they're asking me all these questions. Okay, do you think he's in Toronto? Listen, I don't give a shit, because if he's here, he ought to run. Because these guys are fanning out. So wherever he is, get the out of Dodge. Get out of Dodge. Is there any way you can tell? What do these people want from him?
Well, I know that they were looking for him because he was excommunicated and making a nuisance of himself to the church.
It's got to be more than that. Not for this kind of money, man. It's got to be more than that. They're telling me that they had people following his wife on a bus, that they had people sent out to you, and that they were offering to fly you out to places. And I'm thinking, none of this adds up. None of it adds up.
Yeah.
I mean, am I going to be able to shake these people? I mean, I got a feeling that this is just not a good vibe. None of this is adding up, and it's got to be more than just this guy making fun of people or pissing people off. I mean, I'm not getting it. How big are these people?
The church? It's not a huge church, but very rich apparently. I don't know very much.
Jesus Christ! There's got to be a way to shake
And
these guys.
So since you spoke to me the other day, they've been contacting you again?
Yeah, they're telling me that I've been engaged for the job, that I took the deposit, and I have to finish it. I'm not finishing a job with these people. I told them I'll give them their money back. I don't want nothing to do with it. And what they're basically asking me to do is illegal.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of things that they would do that is illegal.
Yeah, but it's more than just illegal. They're talking about kidnapping.
Are they?
This ain't right.
Are they specifically, explicitly using that word?
Not that word, but they sure as hell danced around it. And they're offering all kinds of dough on top of it. So, I mean, look, I don't understand, but they got all this guy's medical documentation. They got everything. They got everything on this guy's life, stuff that's supposed to be sealed. That's heavy duty.
Yeah. I mean, how much are they offering you?
Said I got a blank checkbook to find this guy, and they told me if I could find him within the month, they'll give me a $150,000 bonus. That's insane for a guy who's a nuisance. That don't add up. They want more from this guy. He must have the goods on them and something fierce. Why doesn't he go to law enforcement or something? There's got to be somewhere he can go. I mean, I got access to a few different databases that he doesn't, but I'll tell you one thing. I ain't telling these guys nothing because I don't want my name tied to this guy goes missing.
Right.
I don't. I know it sounds. I'm sorry. Look, these people are giving me the big time creeps. Big time creeps, and they're having people reach out to me that are way too big on the chain. to try to change my mind. I don't need to be taking calls from people in Alberta who sit in the Premier's office. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So who's this Alan Holman? Sorry, can you remind who was that?
This Holman guy was a political organizer for the Premier.
Kenny.
He used to be his boogeyman. His conscious guy.
Okay.
Alan Holman, former campaign manager for the Premier of Alberta, pressured the PI to complete the illegal orders given by Brethren member Brad Mitchell. Holman was charged with assault in 2017 at a political conference after being banned from his party and later fined for obstructing the investigation. The wealthy PBCC, while not allowing their members to vote, has long been known to influence elections financially. Tillsonburg Tube and Brad Mitchell are both listed as donors to a far-right political group that has recently caused controversy by posting attack ads against Liberals in national newspapers. Phil Jenner, CEO of Klondike Lubricants, along with 14 other Brethren sources, contributed a total of $31,000 to the campaign.
Right.
But it's something going on here, man.
So they gave you a check, and
no, they didn't give me no check. They're sending me Interact transfers $5,000 at a time from a place called Klondike Fuels and another place called Tillsonburg Tube.
Tillsonburg Tube, right?
Yeah, they're two different. They're sending me for just little businesses.
Tillsonburg Tube is owned by another Brethren member, Keith Prince. Prince is also listed as the chairman of Tillsonburg Meeting Room Trust, another of the PBCC's many charity.
Like clockwork, every Sunday it comes in. I want to give them their money back. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like, this is too heavy for me. I don't do this sort of stuff, but that's not what this is about. These guys are hunting this guy.
Okay.
This is not what I do. I'm really, really freaked out about this. He's got to run. He's got to go. He's got to get the hell away from here. If he's in Ontario, get out of Ontario. Go anywhere but. Pick a province on a map with a dart.
Okay.
Anything. If you ever, I need to know more about these people. I don't care if it comes through a letter. I just need to know about these people. Who the hell are they? And if he's ever heard of this guy named Brad Mitchell.
Okay.
Because that guy is really giving me the creeps.
What specifically is he saying to you about?
It's how he's saying. The guy, I thought these were religious people. This guy is talking about his wife. I'll give you an example. This is not my words, okay? I'm going to give you a vertibomb.
Okay.
He's telling me she's a coon. And then he's making remarks about Jews. And he's making remarks about, he said, this guy's a packy. This is how he talks.
Okay, yeah, right.
This guy's supposed to be religious?
No, yeah, nothing religious about it.
Yeah. That's it. I'm just, I'm ducking these guys' calls, and I don't want the same treatment from these religious loonies coming by my place of business and shit. I can't. I don't need that stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Just be careful.
Well, thanks for your heads up.
No, you got
it.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
The incident has been reported to the RCMP, and there is an ongoing investigation into the illegal and malicious practices of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church and Universal Business Team. Richard Marsh has never met or done any harm to Brad Mitchell, Keith Prince, or their businesses. They have no personal reason whatsoever to harass him. They are just being used as a front for the PBCC. Richard's only crime was leaving the Brethren cult and exposing the extreme corruption and coercion within. In 2018, the Brethren held meetings inside their church rooms worldwide with thousands of unsuspecting members, specifically to denounce 3 named persons as opposers. Members over 18 were then coerced to sign a document promising not to communicate with those persons. Richard Marsh was one of those named. PBCC leader Bruce Hales has publicly referred to opposers, those who have left, as traitors, and has said they should take a shot of poison, be shot in the head, and take some arsenic. Universal Business Team, which employs Brad Mitchell, is the business arm of the PBCC, employing hundreds of PBCC members worldwide. Amongst other products, UBT sells modified computers and mobile phones to Brethren members who risk assembly discipline, shunning from friends and family if they purchase elsewhere. Additional software tracks online activity and centers most of the World Wide Web, allowing PBCC leaders to control flow of information, communication, and education.
Members are told it's for their protection.
So it's been a while since you've listened to that, I would imagine.
Yeah, been a bit of time. It's that last bit there. It's funny because at the time I was working with certain members of the RCMP, and I had called them and told them about Richard, and had given Richard the number of my contact to call. And I believe that after Richard called, it was only a day later, I got a call from my guys at the RCMP, and they completely cut ties with me. They told me that this was way too political, and they couldn't be involved.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
I called the guy, I had a long conversation with him, but he kind of, he knew, he acknowledged that he worked with David Wallace, but he kind of said there wasn't much he could do to help me. So,
Which was more concerning.
Yeah.
So after this phone call went out and became public, what happened after that? Like in your life, David, what happened in that?
Well, they weren't pleased. Let's put it that way. But I got a call from Hallman. He said, "Are you going to give this guy up?" I said, "No." I said, "This is fucked up, Alan. Pardon my language, but you got this one bag of shit Mitchell who's asking me to kidnap a guy. I don't do that kind of stuff. You guys lied to me." He told me that I would receive $5,000 a month as a retainer from the Brethren through him. And basically they just wanted to keep tabs on Richard and make sure he didn't leave the country, and they would regroup and get their warrants. And that's how they left it. I received a call shortly afterwards that Alan wanted to bring me out to Alberta, said he had a lot more work for me. I was booking many tens of thousands of dollars a month in Alberta for that at that point. Through another associate of Alan's, they arranged for me to rent a house in Alberta to come out. When I came out after a couple of weeks, that's when the ultimatum came down. All the money that was owed to me, all the work that was forthcoming, would not be coming unless I handed Richard over his immediate whereabouts. And
so they tied all your other jobs into giving Richard up.
Yep. Yeah, basically at that point, Chapor and Hallman brought a lot of pressure to bear through my other conservative clients, and they basically isolated me and starved me out, not to mention ripping me off for tens of thousands of dollars that was already owed. But I wasn't going to give up Richard at that point. It wasn't, they were pretty stubborn, but I could be a bit stubborn myself too. So it didn't do me any favors.
There's receipts about this. So I got the recording of that phone call that we just listened to, published it on YouTube, and it was published on LinkedIn and everywhere. And of course, everything hit the fan. The Brethren flew into a panic because all their dirty schemes were unraveling. And of course, their relationship with David had completely changed, because now David was clearly not on their side, but he also had a massive hold over them, because they knew that, as well as the phone call, which had already gone out, that David had hundreds of emails from them with their names and addresses on that completely exposed them. So they then flew into panic. What's David going to do with all his emails, all the messages we've sent him? And so this is text messages between Alan Hallman, who was in contact with the Brethren, and David Wallace. And David had been checking out the Brethren's LinkedIn profiles. He'd looked at Brad Mitchell, he'd looked at Mick Stranger's LinkedIn. And because they're LinkedIn Premium, they can see who looks at their profiles. And so Alan Hallman is saying, the folks notice you checked out their LinkedIn. Please don't. It just makes them very nervous. Thanks. So the Brethren are complaining to Alan Hallman that David Wallace is checking out their LinkedIn profiles. It's making them nervous, because suddenly this sort of kraken they've unleashed on one of their enemies now is starting to turn its eyes and tentacles towards them.
Hallman had no real knowledge of who these people were. At least he didn't seem very knowledgeable. It was a job that was farmed out to him through his buddy Jerry. Alan didn't, he had no insight onto who these people were or what their community was. And it was my impression that he had never done business with them before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jerry's the big guy. I mean, Jerry, we'll see from documents later that Jerry had been working for the Brethren and specifically for Brad Mitchell since at least 2005. So there's a long, long relationship with Brad Mitchell and the Brethren and Joel Shapur. How Alan got mixed in, I mean, Alan's, just a gopher for Jerry, I guess, in political things. So,
we have to remember too, if we go back into the political side of things, I mean, there's a video out there of all those prominent Brad Mitchell on that front row when
it's Brad Mitchell sitting on the front row at Stephen Harper's inauguration ceremony, along with 4 other prominent Brethren members.
Yeah, here's the video of that.
Okay, so finishing off this text message, Alan Hallman says, I also need all correspondence and information you have in regard to these guys. Thanks. So Alan Hallman is saying to David Wallace, you've got to hand over all the messages, all the text messages, all the WhatsApp, all the emails you ever had for these guys so we can destroy this evidence. And David Wallace is replying, all the material is mine. I don't give away anything to anyone. I'm in possession of that, and it's safe and will remain so. I'm tired of these people, all of them, and I told them to cease hacking, and they didn't. I have the digital crack they use to get in, and that's unacceptable. They were told not to fuck with me, and they broke the rules. A pity. Next. So this is David refusing to hand over all the emails that, eventually became the Klondike Papers.
So what is this like reliving this?
And now, I mean, everything's different compared to what it used to be. I mean, the whole process has really changed everything. So I don't look at things as I used to. I mean, I don't look the same. I don't act the same. I'm kind of discovering who I am. So looking back at this, it puts me into a very different mindset.
And does it make you, do you sit back and you're like, I can't even believe that went down?
Oh yeah. I mean, I just, the truth is, I mean, if I hadn't have been involved in this particular case, things might not have changed for me. I'd probably be busy at work, making a lot of money on the right side of the political,
Yeah, because this was a turning point in your whole life, wasn't it? Like you became a whistleblower, and out of becoming a whistleblower, I mean, they bled you dry, right? You finally did get back to Ontario, but I mean, it really changed your life, didn't it?
Yeah, it destroyed everything. I've lost everything I own, all my savings. And it's important to understand that the only reason I was taking these sort of jobs when I got back into Canada, because I'd always for decades kept my work, what I do, completely separate from my personal life. When I was John Natta, as you see in those emails, a lot of times I would be working as John Natta in Eastern Europe or the United States or anywhere but Canada. I was only taking these political jobs in Canada because after the Russian invasion of the Ukraine in 2014 and the subsequent freezing of assets and the problems with the Privat Bank in the Ukraine, I lost all my money. I had many millions of dollars that were on deposit. So I had lost all of my ill-gotten gains. So I was taking these jobs to try to put together a bit of a nest egg, and that's the only reason I was doing business in Canada at all. And it was the first time in my professional career that I had really used my own name on a job. So it led to a lot of problems. I mean, my wife, not least of, was very surprised to find out what I did for a living. Completely separate life. She had no idea. Nobody knew. Nobody in my family knew what I did for a living.
Wow.
So it's kind of now I'm David Wallace again, and I'm trying to figure out exactly who that is.
I think we're all on that journey.
David then received a text from Alan Hallman saying, "Hey, the brethren want your computer and will buy you another. What would you think of that? Thanks."
Okay, so this is the next email that is coming up.
So this is what happened after I'd published the conversation, and David and I made contact, and initially David
and that's dated Thursday, July 29th.
Please take this down. But when we had a conversation, I explained what the brethren were, and he very generously decided to kind of wholeheartedly take my side in the matter. And so we've now got to this is April, so this is a couple of months after this all went down. And this is like friendly conversation between me and David. And I'm just sending him some news that's just hit the fan. So this is from me to David Wallace. Subject, PI scandal breaking news. Hey, this hit the fan in New Zealand today. Call me when you're free. Thanks, Richard. And then there's a link to a New Zealand news article. And I'll just read this article because this...
Oh yeah, you've got to read this.
Extremely relevant. And this went down literally within 2 months of the whole David Wallace Klondike Papers scandal blowing up in Canada. This is what went down in New Zealand. So this is from Radio New Zealand, A 2-year investigation for Radio New Zealand has found the exclusive Brethren Church, that's the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, is a major and secret client of controversial private investigators Thompson and Clark. A privacy law specialist believes the church's use of private detectives to spy on former members could potentially lay it open to charges of harassment. Investigative reporter Nikki Hager says the discredited private investigation company has dossiers on at least 20 former members of the exclusive Brethren based on street surveillance, monitoring of social media, checks in public records and information supplied by church leaders. Professor Nicole Moram from Victoria University told reporter Ruth Hill it could also have a damaging psychological effect on those being watched. And then this is another report, also April, little later in April this is April 2021, yeah. And this is Radio New Zealand. Former exclusive Brethren member wants charitable status stripped. A former member of the exclusive Brethren in Britain is calling on the government to strip the church of its charitable status. Lance Christie, who was excluded from the church 4 years ago, was followed by private investigators during his visits to New Zealand and Australia to confront church leaders about what he calls their destructive doctrine of separation. He told reporter Ruth Hill about the first time he knew he was followed. Doug Watt, of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, says that just like any church, we're sad if someone leaves us, but we wish them all the best in their lives and, of course, hope that one day they will change their mind. So this is Doug Watt, the spokesman for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. And then this is the bit I really want to focus on. In a written statement, Watt said, "What our church or leadership does not do is launch secretive, clandestine, overnight operations with hired private investigators."
No, they're political fixers.
Exactly.
He's not actually lying. He wasn't a PI.
Well, he wasn't actually a PI. No.
And I had never represented myself as one to them. I mean, I was very clear in my emails.
And then he goes on to say, while we cannot comment on the actions of every individual within our church, it is certainly true to say that the church leadership has absolutely no knowledge of or involvement in the matters that you have described.
Which we can go back to those emails when they talk about global. So global is what's represented, and that's what's referred to as the Hales dynasty, right?
Global is the Brethren's Global Advisory Panel, also known as GAP. It consists of members of Bruce Hale's family, plus the heads of key PBCC ecosystem branches such as UBT Chief Caleb Hall, PPE Profiteer John Anderson, and UBT accounting head Phil McNaughton. The Global Advisory Panel is the executive board of the cult. It meets in secret in the executive floor of the PBCC headquarters, the precinct in Sydney, Australia. This is the location that was raided by the Australian Tax Office in March. This is the only known photo of Global assembled in the precinct. The documents obtained from the Australian Securities and Investment Commissions, or ASIC, show the directors of GAP are as follows. Document link attached in the description of podcast. Dean Hales from Sydney, Australia. Cameron Hales from Sydney, Australia. Mick Strange from Cleveland, USA. Rod Diplock from San Francisco, USA. Caleb Hall, Palmerston North, New Zealand. Jonathan Hubbard, Sydney, Australia. John Rich, Guildford, United Kingdom. Jim Hazel, London, United Kingdom. Ewan Lloyd Churnside, Melbourne, Australia. Brent Scott, Oxbow, Saskatchewan, Canada. Logan Curry, Taranah, New Zealand. Phil McNaughton, Sydney, Australia. Greg Mason, Auckland, New Zealand.
I want to go back to something they said here too. But just like any church, we're sad if someone leaves us. I want to just inform Doug Watt that no, other churches don't get sad when someone else goes to another church. It happens all the time. People can go to a Catholic church one day and go to a United church the next day. Nobody cries over it.
Yeah.
When the recording of David Wallace's phone call went public, the Brethren flew into a blind panic. They had just spent tens of millions on a global PR campaign to rebrand themselves as a mainstream Christian church, with an ethos of compassion in action. They were about to be exposed as a brutal and thuggish Scientology-style cult. What to do? They chose the nuclear option. They hired shillings. Who are shillings? They are a famous and unique business who specialize in providing reputation management services to billionaire A-list celebrities who have literally been caught with their pants down. They combine ferocious attack dog lawyers with military-grade private investigators, cybersecurity experts, and PR spin doctors. They also are off-the-chart expensive. Check out this article where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle hired shillings over a highly embarrassing letter leaked by Meghan's dad. And the headline of the article says, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle recruit attack dog lawyers used by the rich and famous in lawsuit over Markle letter. And it goes on to say, when the rich and famous want to silence their critics, it is to attack dog lawyer shillings that they frequently turn. Media experts said choosing the aggressive London-based shillings was a risky move by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. One said it could be seen as using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. The Shillings legal team aimed to scrub the internet clean of any reference to the David Wallace scandal by firing off threatening letters to the social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube. Here is the letter that they sent to Twitter. So it says, in the top right-hand corner, Shillings, and private and confidential, March 10th, 2021, most urgent, not for publication. Dear Sir or Madam, Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, the PBCC. We act for the PBCC. 1. We have been instructed to lodge this complaint to Twitter on behalf of our client, and then it's blanked out. Number 2, we write in relation to a Twitter account which is currently publishing a defamatory allegation against our client. The posting questions are available at the following URLs. Then it goes on to number 3. Taken together, the tweets would be understood to mean that our client has hired a private investigator for $10,000 a week to kidnap Mr. Richard Marsh, a former member of our client's church. The allegation, in quotations, the allegation is one of serious criminal conduct, is wholly untrue and defamatory of our client. Number 4, we refer to the audio recording contained in a YouTube video which is linked to in the 5th tweet. The
the audio recording. The audio recording is of a telephone conversation between a private investigator named David Wallace and an individual named Dr. Karat Singh. In the audio recording, Mr. Wallace claims to be receiving instructions to commit illegal acts from an individual named Brad Mitchell. Mr. Wallace does not at any stage in the audio recording state that he was hired by our client, because he was not. Our client does not and has never employed Mr. Wallace and has no involvement in the events described by Mr. Wallace during the audio recording. Prior to the audio recording being brought to our client's attention via social media, it had no knowledge of Mr. Wallace or the events he describes. The allegation is therefore entirely false and defamatory. As proved by multiple emails and UBT Zoom calls, David Wallace was hired by Rod Diplock, Brad Mitchell, and Mick Strange. Diplock and Strange are two of the four directors of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church in the USA, and all three hold top positions in the UBT, the financial wing of the cult. Not only this, but the PBC's Global Advisory Panel was requested and received an urgent update during the process. But in the Shillings letter, they claimed that prior to the audio recording being brought to their client's attention, the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church had no knowledge of Mr. Wallace or the events he describes. The Shilling letter finishes as follows. Requirement number 9. In light of the above, our client requests your confirmation that you will terminate the account as a matter of urgency. Number 10. We trust that given the seriousness of the allegation made against our client, that this request will be dealt with as a matter of urgency and in any event, no later than midday, Thursday the 11th, March 2021. We reserve all of our clients' rights. Yours faithfully, Shillings. Richard wrote to Shillings telling them that their client was lying to them and enclosed the evidence. No further Shillings attack occurred, and the scandal, along with the Klondike Papers, proceeded to go viral. Shillings' prestigious client list includes Diana, Princess of Wales, Prince Harry, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, J.K. Rowling, and Sir Paul McCartney. They can now proudly add Brad Mitchell and Rod Diplock to the list. A few months later, David Wallace handed over his entire archive of communication to Richard to index and publish as he saw fit. Out of over 15,000 pages of emails, documents, text, videos, and audio recordings, Richard condensed 3,500 pages that were of public interest. This compilation was named the Klondike Papers, after Brad Mitchell's business, Klondike Lubricants. As so often happens, the Brethren's efforts to silence a critic and cover a scandal backfired spectacularly, leading to a massive exposure of Brethren corruption far more devastating than their original crimes they sought to hide. The Klondike Papers opened the floodgates. The Klondike Papers were distributed to a select handful of Canadian journalists, resulting in the publication of numerous articles that caused severe embarrassment to several leading Canadian right-wing political figures, including Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, and Jonathan Dennis, former Attorney General of Alberta. The Klondike Papers are even in Wikipedia under the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church now. In particular, Emily Leadham of Press Progress deserves special mention for an excellent series of articles unraveling the extensive corrupting political influence of the Brethren in both Canada and the USA. Fearless podcaster James D. Fiore of Blackballed contacted Richard when he saw these articles, and in a series of interviews with Richard and other produced podcasts exposing the rampant sexual abuse in the PBCC and the persecution of former members. The Blackballed podcast caught the attention of Jesse Brown of Canadaland, who produced their own award-winning podcast series about the Klondike Papers called Ratfucker. Documentary producer Alex McIntosh of City TV also saw the Klondike Papers articles and worked with Richard and other former Brethren members to produce the Breaking Brethren documentary broadcast on Canadian TV in the spring of 2022. Inspired by the Breaking Brethren documentary is where I came forward with my heartbreaking story of child abuse, trafficking, and torture at the hands of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church elders in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan. And I went to the police and filed a report that took 2 days and 9 hours to do. This in turn led to the creation of the Get a Life podcast, the most devastating expose of the Brethren ever published. The Klondike Papers went viral on social media. Here are some of the clips.
So the Klondike Papers.
The average person has no idea about this church. So if it does come out that that church has been pulling strings, which have, resulted in a lot of the things that have happened in the last few years, that wasn't known by the people who followed any of these movements. They were victims of misinformation. And I think everyone, whether you're a convoy supporter or not, whether you're on the right or left, most average people do not want anything like evangelical Christian sect controlling any.
So all of your favorite conservative homeboys, Polyev, Bergen, Ford, Harper, they were all implicated in the Klondike Papers. And I'm sure there's going to be more.
Surveil and track this ex-member of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church checks out. I've spoken to the ex-member in question. I've looked at these documents. I've looked at the church's tactics elsewhere, and everything follows.
Can I just say that I love you, and I've been thinking about it all day?
Hey everybody. So I'm hoping more and more Canadians have been reading up on the Klondike Papers. From what I've read so far, it's quite terrifying.
Okay, so it's time to go over some frequently asked questions when it comes to the Klondike Papers, and I'm here to answer some questions that I see a lot coming up in the comments to the best of my ability.
The Klondike Papers are thousands of emails, texts, documents that reveal corruption and otherwise very shady behavior regarding the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church and a bunch of Canadian conservative politicians.
So the Klondike Papers, for those who don't know, are a bunch of papers that were leaked that shows ties between the Plymouth Brethren Christian cult and the Conservative Party and the UPC Party of Canada.
Okay, part 3, let's dive into it. It has been an absolutely intense 24 to 48 hours when it comes to the Klondike Papers, and I hopefully will have some really exciting things to announce soon, but for now, let's talk about... Okay, so if you're a Canadian and you care a little bit about Canadian politics, you should probably start paying attention to this story. The story being the Klondike Papers. The Klondike Papers is a complicated group of documents, 6,400 documents.
I think about the Klondike Papers. My immediate gut reaction is, oh my gosh, I always knew this was true, and I'm so thrilled somebody's finally talking about it.
And this all comes from the Klondike Papers, which was a leak by David Wallace, who was a political fixer for the Conservatives. I refused to originally talk about this because I had no way to validate it, but Canada did a deep dive and a series on it.
You need to look up the Klondike Papers. You need to look up Stephen Harper. You need to look up Plymouth Brethren Church.
The Klondike Papers. My final thoughts.
Just starting to delve into these Klondike Papers and mind blown. And honestly, I just want to be like, told you so, told you so.
To the insiders, these are not attacks on the brethren like Bruce is telling you. None of this is your fault. We are trying to help you see through what you were inside. You are in a cult, and as hard as that is to hear, you can get out. Bruce Hales and his team are using you. He is the devil's pawn, and you are playing right into it. This podcast is full of concrete, foolproof receipts of the evil and corruption they have their hands in. Please find your courage to walk away. You deserve more. Bruce himself has used the word mafia before in UBT seminars. Ben Woodbury had a death threat from someone high up that used the same word. You need to realize you are just pawns in their game. This is not a mainstream Christian church, and it will fall. Leave now before it gets any messier. And ask yourself honestly, how much was covered up just in this one podcast? How many lies were proven just in here? The ex-members are not out to oppose this cult. We want our families out of harm's way. What will happen if you're the next one in one of those drunken accidents? I have one question for you. What is the one thing you can do today to prepare to leave?
It's a criminal organization, and
and right down to the kind of family-type leadership. It's very much like the Godfather and his sons, isn't it? You know, the second lieutenants in the whole thing are always the sons of the Godfather, and everyone else is held in fear and terror of those, and that's the royal family.
I plead with my siblings and my parents and my family to get out while you can. This system's gonna go down and you don't want to be caught in it. Get your businesses separated from UBT. It is such an evil criminal system that is being exposed on every level. If you have the opportunity to get out now.
Yep, yeah. And it's inevitable. The process has already started. The legal process, the bad press, the will of governments around the world have turned against the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Yeah. And from this point forward, it'll be a slow but steady, inevitable decline. You'll see criminal prosecutions. You'll see more survivors of sexual abuse that will come forward. The death spiral has begun, and it will not be reversed. The Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, I don't think that they'll be around in any form or fashion in 20 years. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. I want to thank you both for walking through what seems to be just like the tip of this iceberg. So we'll definitely continue this saga. Please comment below on any questions you have for David or Richard that we can answer on our next podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to keep our podcast at the top of the algorithms. Also, make sure to check out our online store that helps to support Get a Life. And we also have a donation button on our website if you have the means to support us that way. To the insiders, please stop and think about what was revealed here. Enough is enough, and change needs to be made. Please reach out to us at info.getalife@proton.me if you are needing help, or to the Olive Leaf Network. Sending you guys all so much love. Okay, yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, David.
Until next time.
How can you support Get a Life podcast? You can donate internationally via PayPal at www.paypal.me/getalifepodcast. PayPal also has a QR code that can be scanned. Or donate to our Get a Life podcast GoFundMe. If you're in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Check out www.get-a-life.net for Get a Life merchandise, books, and ways to support or get support. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.